information and
Here's a question. Do they offer training for coaches?
well, one of the scenarios is they can usually never find enough.
Well, maybe they need to come up with more of like an incentive program to get people to want to do it.
Yeah, I mean, I went to a coach's camp and quite a few of us did this year, but she's staying rookie ball where it doesn't really matter so much.
Goodness. Hello.
No, just tired.
Tired.
But
Hi, Zetta. How's that thermostat?
says that somebody fits all the criteria.
Your microphone's really working.
Yes, I covered it. I'm not used to that.
Your hair's getting really red.
Just right, which means it'll get cold here in a minute.
Yes, it will.
Yeah, you know, take a couple extra days off. It helps.
Long sleeve shirt tonight.
Sure.
Yeah, I didn't throw my sweater.
Just doesn't seem like it
Just wanted to be
should be that much of a problem. Dial it back.
okay.
I didn't like run quick when nobody's in here.
No, I'm tired.
20 minutes.
It was a
in,
long, hard day.
Puts it in hyperdrive and it just turns into a walking computer.
And
But of course, all the air is coming right down
I don't
on
know.
top of us.
Yeah. Should be someone who's always hot up there. Question.
Are we talking about
proceeding.
Mondays?
yeah,
Where should we seat you?
Did you have a good time? It's got, I think it's worse further this way I've gone. The guy's in the middle of right between these two.
Call of council.
Russ Brown.
Present.
Darcy Walters.
Present.
Timothy McLaughlin.
Present.
Linda Miller.
here.
Tanner Elliott.
Here.
Mayor Lawrence.
Here. Please join me in pledge of allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next item on the agenda is approval of the agenda. There's no additions or deletions that I know of. So I have a motion regarding approval of the agenda.
I'll move to approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved and seconded to approve the agenda as presented. Any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's passed. Next item is presentation proclamations, Columbia Gorge Regional Airport quarterly report.
Looks like a covert operation.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and Council and City Manager and City Clerk.
Good evening, Airport Manager.
It's hard to believe that and Honorable Attorney Gene Parker. So it's hard to believe another quarter's passed already. As I always say, it seems like time flies when you're having fun. So, and that's exactly what's taking place, to be real honest with you. I presented a quarterly report. Also, I included TAC Aero's report that they turned into the airport board. I'll say one thing, that TAC Aero, the fuel cells were going very well for them. The fly-in that we had on the 23rd went well. It was not attended as well as last year. A lot of people didn't like the wind because it was very windy that day. So that didn't help. And we had a couple cancellations due to fires. Had a helicopter that was supposed to be there, but they had to cancel because of fires they were fighting and that they were on call for. But other than that, things are on the move. Life Flight's occupied their building, and they're happy with it. Things are going well. We have our drainage pond that's under construction, that's going well. Hopefully, we'll have it completed here by the end of this month. And Washington State DNR, the fire boss base is going well. They were out fighting the Memaloose fire, and they were very helpful in putting that under control. Took a little doing, I understand, because they're actually contracted with Washington DNR, and so they had to get permission through Oregon in order to figure out who was going to pay for it, I guess is what it all boiled down to. But they finally got them out, and they were on it, and they were very effective. They dumped, I guess, about 12,000 gallons of water on that thing in a couple hours. So it's a very effective piece of firefighting equipment that we're fortunate to have here. So other than that, there's just some dates there that anybody that would like to attend one of our airport board meetings, we'd welcome you. It's at 7 o'clock in the morning, everyone's favorite time.
Tell them about the donuts, Chuck. It's the best.
Yeah, we have donuts and coffee, so you're welcome. And then just some other things that are coming up. We have the drag races that are coming up in August. Last weekend, we had a new event. I was approached about a Mexican rodeo, and I had mixed emotions about it, but they were very well organized, and it went over well. And the income was about $1,500, so I'm a little greedy sometimes. Any income I can pick up extra, I'm more than happy to do it. But they said it went very well, and they were very pleased with the facility, and I've heard no comments, so that's a good thing. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions anyone may have, or if I've never seen him lost for words. Is this the same deal? Okay.
What's driving the big increase in the fuel cells?
Just increase, well, one thing that's helping is that TAC Aero, they have 3 of their own aircraft there that have been very active with flight instruction. And then they have a fleet of airplanes. They have about 20 aircraft of their own, and they fly in and out of the Dalles and Hood River both. And then General Aviation has been on the move so far this year, and our jet traffic's been up. So it's just a combination of things, and sometimes you have good years and sometimes you don't. But and the fire bosses being there, they've been fairly active. They use some jet fuel, so it's just a combination. But things are looking up as far as general aviation. So
Good.
There's a new beacon light?
oh, did you notice that?
Oh, hard not to.
I was surprised that I didn't get a phone call from anybody that has a view in the Dalles called me, and.
No, not all.
Well, no, not all, but I had a few phone calls, and I was notified by U.S. Cellular that they were going to make a change in some of the lighting on the beacon tower. And it's their tower, and it works well for us. We don't have to maintain the beacon anymore, but so he just wanted me to be aware of it, and I said, okay, great. And I asked him what was the reason. He said the FAA had changed the requirement. So they put this light up, and it's a white flashing strobe light. And Bonneville Power did the same thing to us. We live up above the dam, and they put 2 of these white lights up that flash. Well, at night, as you all know, they're pretty intense. And I remember calling Bonneville Power and asking them, why was the change? What happened to the red ones? And the guy said, well, they turn red at night. And I said, no, they don't. And so they had to do something that they do turn red at night. It was the same thing that happened at the airport. Now that it turns red, no one's annoyed by it as much. So, but yeah, you're right. I appreciate you noticing that.
Hard not to.
You're right. Some of the people really told me how hard it was not to. And thanks for not calling me, Mr. Mayor.
I think we discussed it in person, didn't we?
Yeah, we might have.
I had a clarification about the staffing. I just wasn't sure. You said 1 new admin and 2?
No, what we've done is we have 2 part-time guys working that's helping do the maintenance. We have quite a backlog, and there's some things that I wanted to do differently at the airport since I'm the head guy, I guess. And so we've been trying to make our airport a little more presentable. We've done a lot more mowing this year than we've done in the past. And we have some backlog and maintenance that we need to do on some of the buildings. And we decided to do the drainage pond ourselves, which is going to work out well. I hired a gentleman from the county. He's retired from the county, David Ree, and he's very talented heavy equipment operator. And so that was just something he likes to do. So that's what I have. And then I have a young lady, Cheyenne Henderson, that works for me in the office. And unfortunately, she's going to be leaving at the end of the month, so I'm going to be looking again, so. But right now, we have 3 people actually doing things, and then I just kind of sit around and,
If only it were true.
but we do have 3 people that are actually, and very productive, so it's really good. It's a good program for us, so,
Okay, thanks.
thank you.
Any other questions? And really appreciate the quarterly reports. These are good.
You bet.
These are very helpful and lets us know what's going on. So
Well,
thank you.
it's my pleasure to come up and do them, and you'll see me in another quarter, which will probably be by very quickly, so, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Covert.
Next item on the agenda is audience participation. During this portion of the meeting, anyone may speak on any subject which does not later appear on the agenda. 5 minutes per person will be allowed. If a response by the city is requested, the speaker will be referred to the city manager for further action. The issue may appear on a future meeting agenda for city council consideration. Is there anyone who wishes to address the council today?
Yes. So what I'm gonna do is just have a little handout. So it's Main Street, we have a simple monthly, what's it? Little update, little infographic that gives you some of the details of what we're doing. So I was like, it's all sticking together. So it gives you a lot of the information right here, and I'll just hit some of the highlights for you. There we go. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So which one do you want me to go to? This is good. All right. So I'm Louise Long-Heinrich, own Lines of Designs here, and I'm the president for this year for Main Street. So the little sheet that you have is what we'd like to do now in this new fiscal year is have a monthly update for Main Street. So that way you see exactly what's going on a monthly basis. Just to sort of point out some of the highlights is our grants. We have received 2 new grants here in the month of June. One was for $25,000, and that was the one that's listed there as being the only one for the state of Oregon. It's a Made on Main Street grant. We're one of 6 states, really. We're the only Oregon one. And that is going to be for the five signs out of the Neon Sign Museum. They're going to be restored, and we'll try to place them on buildings so that people can see it. The signs are bigger than what can be housed in the Elks building. And so we're going to get those restored and up on the buildings. We're hoping to get 3 of them really easy to see from the freeway, so that way people see it and want to come into our community. One of the grantors for that grant is going to throw a big celebration. They're planning it all. It's going to be on August 18th, or I'm sorry, August 11th. It's a Made on Main Street celebration, and so they're organizing it to highlight what this grant was for. The other grant we received was $20,000, and it's for the Gorge Academy, the facade improvements. That's on the corner of McLaughlin and 2nd. It's the old A's Sewing, so that cladding that's on there is going to be removed and have the building restored a little bit. So that grant came in also. In terms of businesses, Main Street has scrambled with this lack of retail space we have downtown. But we have just welcomed a new business, Terracotta. It's a young women's clothing store, accessories, and it's on Washington and 2nd, behind Jeff Judah's, the optical store. So she's there on the Washington side. Great little shop. Please go see it, and give her some business. Another big project that we're in the midst of is the downtown branding project. We've had 3 work sessions with people, business owners, the Main Street board members, and the chamber. And what's come out of that now is a thing called a branding platform, which we're going to do a review session this week. But what it is consider it a skeleton. And the skeleton then has those things that make up what we think of as the story of the downtown. So some of the concepts is, some thought our theme was that we're good for the soul. We have entrepreneurial spirit here in the downtown, and we're also the sunny side of the gorge, which is something that the Chamber's already capitalized on. Some of the proof points, the things that are your visible proof that this is what you say you are, and that's our downtown resurgence, the views of the river, we're a walkable town, our weather that we have, we're bikeable, and then our character in terms of what are the adjectives that we use to describe ourselves. And we're passionate, caring, we're warm, we're genuine, we're authentic, we're a little gritty, and we're family-oriented, and we're grounded. And then in terms of some of the key audiences, for us in downtown, it's not only the tourists, it's also those that are our local customers, and local meaning the Dalles community, but also our regional, think Maupin, Arlington, Goldendale, Hood River. So it's that 80-mile trade radius. Those are our customers also that come here to the Dalles. Students, professionals, business community transplants, those are all the target that we're going to be looking at. And then what we believe in, what we call our guiding principles, is all are welcome, we're loyal, we're honest, we're proud, we have fun, and we're growth-oriented. So that just is sort of the skeleton of our branding project, and then the next step will be we'll do a review, and then we're going to have go for a grant to help us to flesh out that skeleton. And that's where you have a creative agency that works on some of the words, some of the pictures, to sort of flesh out that concept that the downtown folks came up with. Any questions? Great, thank you so much.
Thanks for the update. Anyone else?
Good evening, Council. My name is Summit Storm, address 3120 Old Dufer Road here in the Dalles. I came last week pretty disorganized, and there's been a lot that's happened in the last couple weeks for myself, but I'm hoping to continue what I'm trying to do in the community as just a young adult who is concerned and wants to be involved. So I have a couple things that I just wanted to kind of do an overview of. And I'll start with thanking the council for extending the assistance and the ideas concerning not only the posters for the gatherings that I'm trying to start up and helping me with colored copies to distribute around town, but also it's kind of a whim of an idea of finding creative ways to prevent trash and waste in the Dalles in our community. And I actually have an extension of that, which would be to not only use potentially new bins, but maybe old ones that have sat there for a long time and could be brought back to life, as well as cigarette butt containers. That's a possibility. I know that there's a couple connections I have. There might be a few others out there that I'm unaware of as far as donations for art supplies, because it is kind of expensive. I'm planning on talking to Urban Paper for like acrylic paints. And then I also had a really awesome idea of getting the community involved in this and not just doing it individually as an artist or with a handful of artists, but maybe something like at the farmers market, an event that's already in place, and setting something up there where it's obviously, a space for painting and we can get messy a little bit. But anybody passing by could contribute, kids can contribute, and we could decorate these bins together, which would be kind of cool. And then, as well as maybe this is a new idea, but finding ways to install recycled art around town. I know I just saw him earlier. Some people call him Jesus or Cartman, and he's the guy who set off about 15, 20 years ago to clean up the Dalles, and he walks around with a cart and picks up recycled goods and stuff. And I see him and I'm inspired to do something similar, but also something that will make an impact on how people think about our community. So something along the lines of working with the local artists who are already here to do some sort of recycled art project. Another thing I wanted to talk about was shared visions, and this is something where everybody can connect on. It's really I think something that all of us can agree would be awesome to see in our community. And some of that stuff is creating and communicating opportunities, because we already have so many, but the communication, there's definitely some barriers there for certain people in our community. They just don't receive that information in a timely fashion. They're never really able to catch up with their daily life enough to make it out to these events. Finding ways to do that. Local happenings, volunteer service and connection. I know that there's a lot of volunteer opportunities, and there's a lot of people who could fill those opportunities and gain a lot from it. I'm trying to figure out better ways to network that, especially with the younger generation, I guess. A lot of kids who could find something useful to do with their time and serve the community. And that kind of ties into something that I attempted, but I've kind of fallen out of, which was a weekly report. And just as a citizen, paying attention to the community and different things that are happening, events that are going on the weekend, and trying to get the word about that stuff out there to the community. And I'll try and be quick too, because it's a lot. The expansion of local art and music. I just wanted to name off a few things that are already in existence, and there's actually plenty more, but these are some things I'm aware of. Is the Granada Theater, Discovery Center. We have the Art Center doing showings every month, as well as it's always open on the weekdays. We have the new Mannion Studios, which is going to be a co-op art studio for people who want to go in and be able to use supplies without paying out of their own wallet. Very expensive for some of these supplies. There's free yoga every month, or more than once every month, I think. Farmers market every Saturday. I don't know if movies in the park is still a thing, but I imagine it would be, since we got a giant inflatable screen. Open mics, there's one Wednesday at the Clock Tower every week, and Friday night at Route 30 every week, plus all the live music. Over the weekend, I know Clint's does a lot of stuff with authors, and that ties into people who are more interested in reading, maybe a more low-key thing to tap into. And we have 2 music stores, which are both great, and Gorge Community Music has been trying to start up a drum circle. They definitely could use more participants for people who might not be able to play all the instruments but can hit something. And then a quick reassessment of the gatherings that I've tried to start up is I've just noticed that it's a lot for 1 or 2 people to put in the energy of communication. So I'm going to try and really step back and figure out how to tap into what is already there in the community. Once again, just working with what's already there, because there's already so many people doing individual attempts of bringing people together. So I hope if anybody out there, whether maybe not live streaming right now, but just hearing these words, if you have any ideas or contributions or connections for me, I'm always open. I love to have conversations. That's how I see things moving forward. And I guess the last thing, I'll try and wrap it up. There's more, but I'll come back, I suppose, is I just wanted to talk about trauma, mental illness, and disconnection. And I think pretty much everywhere in the world right now can relate, and just about everybody in this room can relate to having some sort of traumatic experience in their life that changed them. Whether it caused them to be stronger or to be more afraid, it has an effect on you. And I have personally seen in this community there to be an excess of remaining trauma. People unable to find the resources or have the experiences to reverse the negative effects that cause them to have behavioral problems, which usually leads to criminal action, et cetera, et cetera. That's a big reason why I started these gatherings, was to try and catch, especially the younger kids, and just give them a chance to show up somewhere with somebody to listen to and talk it out. Because realistically, it's only through experiences and connection that people feel like they have the ability to choose a good path, especially when they are burdened, I guess, with a lot of trauma. Some people have a little bit, some people have so much that they can just barely function in society. And the reflection on that is I just wanted to remind everybody that we all have the power to help and to heal. Whether it's driving across town and smiling and waving at people. I actually just recently set off on the mission to become the I love you guy. I've got a friend and we drive around town and we look for people. It doesn't matter if they look happy or sad, but we just tell them, I love you, and we smile and wave, and I can tell you that the response to that energetically and emotionally from just their expression on their face is very powerful. And to continue to do stuff like that just because I see how it's effective. But these are things, just talking and looking out for people, taking the time. You have those impulses to talk to somebody in line at the store or to meet somebody and maybe go over and knock on your neighbor's door. You might not even know your own neighbors. These are the things that I'm trying to, I guess, bring back to life, because they're all things that we've done and that we know of, and they're in our hearts and minds. And I just really hope that I can continue to do that. I look forward to continuing to do that. I also have some more information on the different things that I'm doing and the gatherings as well. I look forward to connecting with you and figuring out the colored posters, and I can go walk around and talk to people about it. And also, I'm really excited for the trash thing, the bins, and giving people an opportunity to do it together. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. And that's pretty much it for now. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope you all have an amazing rest of your night. 'Cause I'm going to. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Anyone else? All right. The next item on the agenda is the city manager report.
I would like to give the floor to our finance director. I was looking out there. She has a happy announcement for us.
On June 21st, Global Ratings raised its long-term rating and underlying rating to an AA from an AA minus on the Dallas full faith and credit general obligations bonds. The raising rate reflects their view of the city's growing local economy, strong budgetary performance, strong debt profile, and increase in the city's available reserves. The rating further reflects their view of the city's strong management practices.
Wow.
So we got a grade increase.
So that makes us more eligible for bonding at a better rate? What does that mean?
Well, I think it speaks to our strength, our financial strength as a city primarily.
Okay.
Should be a better rate on the bond because it's
Yeah.
worth more and it's more secure.
All right.
Yeah.
Great.
And that's due in large part to the hard work of that finance director.
Yes.
We appreciate you.
Nice job.
Thank you. And then just one other thing under the city manager report, we have prepared a letter to Representative Greg Walden, and this is in regards to the, FCC using the white space technology that I had mentioned. Excuse me. So we have the letter prepared for the mayor's signature, but I brought copies in case anybody wants to have a copy of the actual words. So I'll just leave them up here.
Okay.
That's all I have tonight.
Okay, city attorney report.
Thank you, Mayor Lawrence. I've been working with Daniel Hunter, our HR person, on the job description for the paralegal position. I believe I shared with you in a recent update that we're looking to create that position to provide me with some support now that I've taken back over the court functions, and we hope to get that advertised here, I think, fairly soon and get some good candidates and get somebody filled. So that's one of the main things. Other thing is I'm recovering from carpal tunnel surgery, which went pretty well. I'm having to use my left hand a lot, which is a little bit odd, but hopefully we'll recover quickly and be able to get back to my yoga. Now I can't do yoga for a while, so.
Is that it?
That's everything.
Okay. Councilman Brown.
I have nothing.
Councilwoman Long Curtis.
I don't have a report tonight.
All right. Councilman
I've been out of town, attended a conference in Las Vegas. 30,000 Lion members converged on Las Vegas. However, one of the projects that I did work on was at a rescue mission in North Reno, or Las Vegas, and there were 500 people served in just under 2 hours. And then there was another group coming in right after us. So what I did notice is it did break my heart to see these folks and the number of children. And anyway, when we look at our situation here in the Dalles, we realize in relationship we don't have it as bad, and but we can do better, and that's what I took away from that trip. So that's my only report. I was busy traveling.
Councilman Elliott.
And who am I?
Okay, I was just going this way. Councilwoman Miller.
That was a good, good save, Mayor. I attended the concert at the Granada for John McEwen, who was one of the original members of the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band, and it brought back a lot of memories. And I attended the Independence Day Parade.
Nothing to report.
What?
Nothing to report.
No report?
No report.
Go Beavs.
Go Beavers.
That was good.
It was a great vacation. Outcome was great.
Since the last meeting, I attended the Next Door ribbon cutting. They're up in the building that used to house McCog, and they look like they're pretty happy with their new digs. I also was able to greet the Little League All-Stars, 600 baseball players who were here, and I hear that we could have twice as many show up for that tournament alone if we had an RV park. And that substantially affects, in fact, talking with Steve Sugg, he said if we had an RV park and a little bit more baseball facilities, we could literally have a tournament every weekend through the good weather. So there's something to think about. Also had a tour recently, last week, of the Neon Sign Museum and what they're up to. They're really, I mean, if you get an opportunity to go over there, you're going to be impressed, even though it's not finished. And they have a traveling mural artist who is helping them put some paint pictures on their windows. And so I'm hoping this week that I will get an opportunity to talk to that person, because they're part of a team. And they can actually organize this team and come into a town like the Dalles and help us restore our murals for not very much money. So I'll find out about what they're all about. I, on Saturday, helped celebrate Ada, who is up at Flagstone, Rosie the Riveter, one of the original. And she was a delight. And then this morning, I attended Regional Solutions, and there were 3 projects which were being submitted from this region. One was for Cascade Locks. They wanted to have money that would help them improve their capacity for delivering water to their industrial site. However, they're going to need a lot of money. And the other project, the irrigation district, they need to have meters, because without meters, what's happening is their orchard structure is using too much water. With meters, they can instruct people, and they can serve water, and they can make it a lot better when there's a dry season. The third one was Sherman County's broadband request. They want to bring internet technology to homes in Sherman County. So the decision was that we will refer all 3 for funding, because even though we're guaranteed 200,000, there's $1.2 million possible. So it's possible we could get all 3 funded. If we don't get all 3 funded, the second part of that request is that for sure that the de-irrigation district gets funded, because that's a $68,000 grant, and they can do a lot with that money. The rest of the money then would probably go to the Sherman County broadband. So that's what I've been doing. The next item on the agenda is consent agenda. Items of a routine and non-controversial nature are placed on the consent agenda to allow the city council to spend its time and energy on the important items and issues. Any councilor may request an item be pulled from the consent agenda and be considered separately. Items pulled from the consent agenda will be placed on the agenda at the end of the action items section. We have for approval the June 25th, 2018 regular city council meeting minutes, and authorization to provide sanitary sewer service outside city limits to the 2300 block of West 16th for new residential development. So with that, do I have a motion regarding the consent agenda?
Mr. Mayor, I need to declare a potential conflict of interest regarding the sewer extension. I've worked for the gentleman that owns the property on that property and likely will in the future, so I think I'll just decline to vote on it.
Okay. So, do I have a motion?
I can move to accept the consent agenda.
I'll second.
Moved and seconded to accept the consent agenda as presented. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's approved.
Brown abstains, right?
Yes.
All right. Now is the time specified for the city council to conduct a public hearing. The purpose of the public hearing tonight is to consider the following matter. An appeal by Alexander and Alexandria Maya, thank you, of the Planning Commission's decision to approve the application submitted by Jonathan Blum for minor petition number 349-18 and adjustment 18-036 to partition 1, 8,778 square foot lot into 2, 4,389 square foot lots, and to reduce the minimum lot size from 5,000 square feet, and to reduce the minimum lot width from 50 feet to 46 feet for a parcel located at 1605 East 19th Street. Bear with me, I'm gonna have to read this whole thing. The relevant criteria upon which the city council will base its decision in this matter is contained in the city's comprehensive plan and the city's land use and development ordinance. A public hearing is required by law and certain rules apply. I will be presiding as the chair for purposes of this hearing. First and foremost, you must be recognized by the chair in order to speak and present testimony. The hearing is required by law to be tape recorded. When recognized by the chair, please proceed to the microphone, state your name and mailing address for the record. Generally, the public hearing procedure is as follows. Prior to the public hearing, a determination will be made of the qualifications of the council members and allow for challenges from the audience. Any of the time limitations set forth below can be extended at the discretion of the council. I will open the public hearing with a staff report. The purpose of the staff report at this point is to further identify the applicable criteria of the case being considered and to provide background information about the case. This is 10 minutes will be allowed. After the staff report, we will hear testimony from the applicant. The applicant is Jonathan Blum. After the applicant has finished presenting his testimony, we will hear testimony from other proponents, those persons who are in favor of the application. 15 minutes for applicant and 3 minutes for each other proponent presentation. Next, there will be testimony from the appellants, who are Alexander and Alexandria Maya, and other persons who are opposed to the application. 15 minutes for appellants and 3 minutes for each other opponent presentation. Next, there will be testimony from anyone else who is not in favor of the application and who is not an appellant or an opponent, but who wishes to offer testimony or who has a question. Then, to honor the right of rebuttal, we will again hear from the applicant. 15 minutes for applicant rebuttal. To expedite the hearing, the council members may ask questions of persons as they testify. When this process has been concluded, we will close the public testimony portion of the hearing. During the hearing, some important standards apply. First of all, those who testify must hold their testimony to the decision criteria. As in all land use hearings, there are a complete set of rules, procedures, and criteria we must follow. Second, failure to raise an issue accompanied by statements or evidence sufficient to afford the council members and the parties an opportunity to respond to that issue precludes an appeal to the Land Use Board of Appeals based on that issue. Third, the failure of an applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to proposed conditions of approval with details specific enough to allow the city to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in the circuit court. Fourth, prior to the conclusion of the public hearing, any participant may request an opportunity to present additional evidence, arguments, or testimony regarding the appeal. If such a request is made, the law states the council must grant the request by either continuing the hearing to a time and date at least 7 days from the date of the hearing, or the record must be kept open for a period of at least 7 days. Those are the rules. Does anyone have any questions? All right. At this point, I'm going to ask the following questions of the council members. Have any members of the council had any ex parte contacts, conflicts of interest, or bias which would not allow them to render an impartial decision on this matter?
No.
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 I'd like to say for the record that I know and do work for the appellant.
Okay.
If I could ask, Counselor, I assume you've not discussed this particular application at all with him or any of the merits of that?
Next question. Does anyone in the audience wish to challenge the qualifications of any member of the council? Okay. So at this time, I'm going to declare the public hearing open and ask for the staff report.
Thank you, Mayor, members of council. You have a number of materials that were distributed on the dais this evening. I believe you have a hard copy of the staff PowerPoint presentation as well as the applicant's presentation. I think you also maybe have, there's a copy of an email or letter also regarding this item. So this is a public hearing, and we're going to be using the same format that we used at your last meeting for that appeal hearing. The staff report, it was the same format from the previous. There's a number of criteria in there, and we'll go over each of those, and we'll move forward with this item. So on what I've done with the PowerPoint presentation, since there's a lot of citation codes and various other numbers and such, I hope it'll make it a little easier to follow this evening. So this originally was a request for a minor partition and two minor adjustments. The partition was to subdivide an existing 8,700 square foot lot into two lots of 4,389 square feet apiece. There was an adjustment of just over 12% on the minimum lot size of 5,000 square feet in the residential low density zone. There was also a second adjustment to reduce the minimum lot width from 50 to 46 feet in that RL zone. It represents just under an 8% adjustment. Those are permitted by our land use code. Planning Commission approved the minor partition and the two adjustments on May 3rd, and those approvals were subsequently appealed by Alexander and Alexandria Maya on the 14th. And Mr. Maya is here this evening. This shows the property in question. Being a minor partition, it's typically a staff-related item, so we have somewhat informal application standards as far as exhibits. But it just shows the existing lot and where the proposed partition line would be. Again, dividing the property 46 feet wide for each, and 95 depth-wise, and there are two easements on either side of the property. Now, the Planning Commission conducted a public hearing on May 3rd. They approved resolution number 574-18 with 5 conditions, and 4 of those conditions are fairly standard. One, that the final plat map needs to satisfy all the provisions of our development ordinance, needs to be recorded within 1 year. Physical constraint permits, those are required if cutter fills exceed 50 cubic yards. And then any future development of the property, again, would have to comply with our development ordinance. Now, following the public hearing that evening, the Planning Commission added an additional condition that was placed on that resolution, and that was in response to public comments during the public hearing. The condition reads as follows: the planning director will process any land use development review of the building permit application as an administrative action. And what that does, typically a building permit is a ministerial item as it comes through our office and then on down to the state building codes for their approval. This would, instead of a ministerial item, would be administrative. And what that does is allow for proper public notice of an administrative hearing surrounding property owners within 100 feet of the subject property. So those property owners would be notified. There is a notice of decision is released. There's a staff report that's prepared, so people are informed. Following that review period, either the application is approved administratively at staff level, or it could be moved up to the Planning Commission for a public hearing. Again, if that would be appealed, then it could be in City Council. So it does give the surrounding property owners notification of subsequent development on the property. And that was a condition that was added by the Planning Commission following the public hearing. Now, in your staff report, again, typical, following the format from our last meeting, there was a number of criteria that need to be met, need to be satisfied. And those are found beginning on page 2 and page 3 of your staff report. Again, some of those are procedural in nature. It speaks of a de novo public hearing, speaks of the right to appeal decisions, of filing appeals, notification of the appeal hearing, and the decision of appeal. So those are, again, on page 2 and 3 of the report. And then beginning on page 4 is where we talk about the actual application itself and the applicability. And this was one of the items that was brought up in the appeal. And talks about when these type of adjustments, when they're allowed or when they're prohibited. So this is, again, section, talks about the applicability. Section B, adjustments and prohibited, subsection 6, to allow an increase in density in the RL zone. Adjustment would not be allowed. This project was originally part of what was called the Oak Grove subdivision, a little over 29 gross acres, and at that time there were 18 lots that were subdivided, which included a 5-acre parcel or 5-acre lot that was subsequently developed for a church. Those original 18 lots, if you were to include the church property, the density was just under 4 units per gross acre. If you were to subtract out that half-acre lot for the church property, remaining 17 residential lots, you would bump that up to 4.28 units per gross acre. Now, what the applicant's proposal was doing was taking one of the 3 vacant lots on the property and subdividing it or partitioning it into 2 lots. So you would end up now with 19 lots in total from that original Oak Grove subdivision. So with that half-acre church lot included in that, the density would increase to 4.19 units per acre. And if you were to deduct that half-acre church lot, and with the applicant's proposal, the density would rise to 4.53 acres. We're talking about gross acres. And we also would still be consistent with the low-density residential on our comprehensive plan, which has 3 to 6 units per gross acre. So as in staff's opinion, this would not increase the density. We are still within the bounds of less than a unit in our gross density, and we're still within that 3 to 6 units per acre.
But that only applies when you have a subdivision, correct?
Right.
If it was not a subdivision, then this prohibition to allow an increase in density would stand?
There's in our development standards, there is a footnote in there that these minimum densities do not apply to infill, to minor partitions. Those are for new subdivisions and for new PUDs, plan unit developments. So this shows the boundaries of the original Oak Grove subdivision. The property that we're talking about, that subject property, is highlighted in yellow. It's this area right here. I apologize, it's a little blurry. So this was, again, a property, a lot that was within the original Oak Grove subdivision at the time. Now, other criteria that must be satisfied were quasi-judicial adjustments. These are adjustments that are provided for in our development code that are greater than 10% but less than 20%, and that's why they go to the Planning Commission. So in our code today, it states that that is allowed up to 20% reduction in the width of a lot or the depth of a lot, and up to a 20% reduction in the minimum lot areas. The applicant has proposed a 7.6% reduction from 50 to 46 feet for the lot width, and a reduction of just over 12% in the lot size itself from the 5,000 square foot minimum to about 611 square feet. So both of those criteria are satisfied. The next has to do with the criteria that these adjustments would not significantly detract from the livability or appearance of a residential area. There's more text in the staff report. But essentially, in our development code, there is not a definition for livability or appearance. We do use the Webster's definition. I believe that's in your staff report. At that planning commission hearing, the applicant did present conceptual architectural renderings of the dwellings, residential in nature, beginning conceptual. There wasn't that much detail with them, but they were somewhat similar to other dwellings in the neighborhood. And then also, the applicant has proposed that access would be by a single driveway for both lots. So we would still have just one access or driveway cut on the street. And then he was also proposing to preserve as much of the mature landscaping as possible. In the R3 zone, there is a up to 60% lot coverage. So for the original property of about 8,800 square feet, you're looking about maybe about potentially 5,200 square foot building or lot could be covered with hardscape. Divide that in half, so potentially that would be half of that, so about 2,600. The applicant, I understand, is not proposing homes to be that large, smaller lots, smaller homes. They will satisfy all the residential low-density zone development standards. So, and the second point would be that the cumulative effect of multiple adjustments, what effect they would have on the particular zone. As I stated, the residential low-density zone allows for single and duplex units. They allow for accessory dwelling units, parks, different types of care facilities are allowed in the zone, as well as bed and breakfast inns, also non-residential type uses like the church itself, different wireless communications facilities. So there are a number of non-residential uses would be allowed in that RL zone. And again, any future development on these two lots would be required to meet the development standards of that particular zone. And with the added condition by the Planning Commission that evening, staff believes that those criteria have been satisfied. This is an area photo that shows the original boundaries of that Oak Grove subdivision. You can see this is the subject sorry, it's doing so well too. So this is the subject property here, this corner. You still has a vacant lot here, and there's a vacant lot here. Directly across the street, there's no driveways. You've got a street here and a street here. You've got these streets or homes are taking access off the side streets. Up here was the church. Kind of see where this red line is. Again, that's the original boundaries of that subdivision. So you can get a sense for this, what the immediate area looks like. Other criteria that need to be reviewed, scenic and historic resources need to be preserved. As stated in the staff report, there are no known scenic or historic resources on the property. Potential impacts need to be mitigated. No impacts were identified that would be attributed to the proposed lot split. That would be unmitigated. And also, there needs to be a protection of environmental sensitive areas. And again, this area is considered not within a sensitive environmental area. So as proposed, these criteria were satisfied as well. And in addition to those criteria, there are a few others that need to be satisfied on a kind of a case-by-case basis. So one of those that would be kind of relevant in this case would be this item here. Oops. Here we go, under additional criteria. States that result in a structure that conforms to the general character or neighborhood of the zone district, and that's the residential low-density zone. Again, character is not defined in our development code. In this immediate neighborhood, there are single-family dwellings. There's an elementary school. There's a church. Further east, there's the medical center as well as other professional offices in that area. And then, again, referring back to the condition that the Planning Commission added at the conclusion of their public hearing, was the requirement that any future land use development would be processed through an administrative action and not ministerial. Again, staff believes that taking into consideration the conditions placed by the Planning Commission and the other uses that can be found in the neighborhood, that this criteria would also be satisfied.
Can you explain a little bit more to me about what exactly that translates to in, on the ground? I guess it would come to you and you would decide whether or not the way the houses looked was okay, or what exactly would you be deciding?
We do have what are called clear and objective standards for development in our housing and our code, and it's a state requirement. We do have, there are architectural design features that are called out in the code itself, and so those are things that we look for. The pitch of the roof, whether there's articulation in the walls, the wall planes themselves, trim on windows, porches, things like that. So those would be items that are currently in our code that we would review any future plans, make sure that they
And
satisfy
why aren't
those
you
requirements.
required to identify what those were?
I'm sorry, sir?
Well, what she's saying is, you know, like you say, if the structure conforms to the general character, and so you look at a bunch of criteria, but you don't identify, at least in this opinion as I see it, any of those features or characteristics that you use to come to the conclusion that it conforms to the general character.
Well, if I could, one, the application before the Planning Commission was the minor partition and the adjustments. The buildings, the future buildings, the homes were not part of that application. So we don't know, we don't have a formal application, we don't know what those buildings will look like. So that's why the Planning Commission, in response to comments that during the public hearing, wanted to have an additional level of review. And rather than a ministerial, they wanted to have that administrative level so the surrounding property owners could be noticed. And if there were concerns, that it could eventually perhaps come before the Planning Commission.
So this is just for the partition,
That's correct,
Lot size adjustment.
lot size adjustment?
yes. In a, if I may, in a, say another entitlement, say a site plan review, where that involves not only how the property is developed, laid out, parking, landscaping, building placement, it also gets into the design of the buildings. And so that would be more appropriate at that level, actual physical characteristics and design elements.
I guess I just would have kind of liked that to be spelled out since it is part of my decision-making process, and this feels a little vague. It's like if I make a decision to let you go ahead based on the fact they attach that, I still don't know exactly what that means and what it looks like in the end.
But you can't know that because there's no application for that.
But I can know
piece.
those criteria that he was just saying just now, that should have been it should have been spelled out, I think, in the staff report, because I want to know that.
It would have been appropriate to ask for additional information, or we can provide that to you, but it's not part of this application process.
No, but it's part of my decision-making process, whether or not the stipulation from the planning department that they added on was enough.
I'm not sure I understand.
So what happens after, let's say, this is only the partition, what happens then about the buildings that are put on there? When does that get reviewed? You're saying you reviewed it, but you're saying you don't have to decide on it. So when does it get reviewed?
If I may, Mayor, what I referred to was during the applicant's presentation at the Planning Commission, he provided conceptual, well, artist renderings, architectural renderings of the homes. That was the first time that we had really seen them. That's the first time they were public. So we do not have a formal application yet. And so if this were to move forward and with this, the applicant would submit those building plans, architectural plans, and we would review them for these clear and objective standards that are in our code.
Is that subject to appeal?
Well, it would be an administrative hearing, yes. And depending on the decision of the hearing officer, then that could be appealed, and that would be appealed to the Planning Commission. And that decision could then also be appealed to the City Council. Just 2 more slides. This is an aerial that shows us the general neighborhood, Dry Hollow Elementary School. On the left, the very far right, that's a medical center. Kind of shows you some of just the general development pattern in the area. And then our last slide, again, is something that we talked about at the last appeal hearing. In our comprehensive plan, goal number 10, housing, speaks to provide housing needs for the citizens of the state. And our housing strategies report from last year speaks to that the city of the Dalles is responsible for helping to ensure that its residents have access to a variety of housing types that meet the housing needs of households and residents of all incomes, ages, and specific needs. There's more background in your staff report on what some of the findings were, demographic trends, real estate market at that time. And then the Oregon Revised Statutes, citation there, again, another state requirement on what's considered needed housing. And this would fall into that definition of attached and detached single and multifamily housing for both owner and renter occupancy. And staff's opinion, both Goal 10 and our ORS 197.303 have both been satisfied. For the past few months, the city's Planning Commission has been conducting study sessions on proposed amendments to our development code as they relate to housing, various development standards. We also are having a public workshop on the 19th of this month, and that'll be at the Civic Auditorium. I believe it begins at 6 p.m. And then following that, there'll be hearings before the Planning Commission and the City Council in the coming months on those proposed code amendments.
Mr. Harris, you stated that this does not, it meets the criteria for 6 units per acre. But in there, I didn't see where it talked about like how many people would live in those units. Is that a criteria driven by the state?
Well, there's no strict definition of persons per household. As far as the city's concerned, we do have some demographic information, but it's for median household size, things like that.
Okay.
So you're gonna have to really help me here. If it's not part of the consideration, then why do issues of livability and appearance and general character, why are those contained in a way that is talked about, there's a conclusion reached, and then there's a finding? Doesn't that in a way, I mean, I could get into legal terms, but preclude somebody relitigating that? You're making findings here, and you tell us in one breath that you're only looking at a partition, but you're making findings based on the kind of house that you think will go in there. And yet you're saying it's not part of the decision.
Well, there was discussion that was raised in the public hearing by those that were opposed to it. And I believe you have a petition and other materials from, see, these were issues that they raised, that the public raised. And as part of reviewing the appeal, we need to address those issues that were raised, regardless of whether the actual construction of the dwelling was part of the application itself.
I mean, in reality,
Doesn't appear, I'm sorry.
well, I mean, it's just, I agree with Darcy's concerns. I mean, I find it troubling to think that, I'm trying to be somewhat diplomatic here. Yeah, anyway, I can imagine a kind of a house going in there that really doesn't fit in the neighborhood, but this is just a minor partition. This involves real estate. It doesn't involve a structure at all. And I don't think we, as much as we would like to use what kind of a structure is going to be there as criteria for our decision, I don't think it's appropriate. I mean, this is dirt that we're talking about.
Right.
And
I just think it's confusing to have those conclusions reached and then say it's only about a partition.
but it is.
I would say that it will significantly impact the appearance of the residential area, because if you look at this subdivision, nothing is smaller than 0.5 acres throughout, and that is pretty far even away from this. So all of the ones all along 19th Street are 0.2 acres, and everything behind that are at least 0.2 up to 0.25. So splitting that into 2.1s does impact the appearance of the neighborhood.
But I don't,
Well, let me sort of
I'm
clarify
with
the
you.
process. At this point, we'll have a discussion later. Let's just keep it to questions that you need clarified.
yeah.
We can have the discussion after we have the testimony. Any other questions for Director of Planning?
So the approval of this original, what am I thinking?
Minor petition?
Right, minor petition was based on needs and desires to reduce requirements for building lot size? Is that accurate? So what you're doing is compressing, you're subdividing in order to multiple use of buildings being put on those lots, smaller buildings. Why not a duplex? Duplex is not allowed in that size lot?
A
in that
duplex,
zone?
if I may, Counselor, a duplex is allowed, however, it's allowed on corner lots in the RL zone.
So it wouldn't be appropriate for this particular lot?
That's correct, but the owner could build a primary dwelling and then build an accessory or a secondary dwelling on the property by right.
Oh, like a grandmother's house in the back, or
Yeah.
a smaller home that's...
Okay, any other questions, staff?
So a concern was to change the type of residence allowed in pre-zoned areas. So that would change the makeup. That was one of the concerns by Bill Merrick, that it will divide the property and set a precedent that will change the type of residence built in the future in the Dalles. Is that a true statement? By partitioning this particular lot. I know that's difficult, but...
Well, it's not for me to decide whether it's going to change the character of the city,
Sure,
but the minor partition process is permitted according to our current standards.
Right.
The quasi-judicial adjustments are permitted, less than 20%. So the applicant's requesting a 611 square foot reduction in the minimum lot size and a 4-foot reduction in the minimum, in the lot width from 50 to 46 feet.
So legally, it fits the parameters?
Yes.
Okay, any other questions?
No.
All right, so, any questions, staff? At this point, I'll ask for the applicant's testimony. Please come forward to the microphone, state your name, mailing address, and proceed. You have 15 minutes.
Excuse me, before you get started, Izetta, I'd really appreciate it if you dial that thermostat back. It's getting pretty cold over here. Thank you.
You're feeling cold?
Yeah, it's the diffuser's right above us. We get all the heat. Oh, you get all the heat.
We're in different seats.
Maybe that's a metaphor. We get all the heat, so we're...
Maybe that's what it is.
All right, you can go anytime.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Harris. Good evening, City Council, Honorable Mayor. My name is Jonathan Blum, and I'm the applicant for this minor partition of the lot that's been described on 19th Street. I'm here this evening to introduce myself and my partner, building partner. His name is Rob Bart. The original application only listed me as the applicant, but we're doing this as partners in this project. I'll explain the proposal a little bit, and I'll talk about the criteria for approval. Many of the things that are in my presentation have already been discussed by Mr. Harris. I will also just talk a little bit about some of the reasons I think that you should support this proposal and why it's legal, lawful, and allowed by the current existing laws of the city land use ordinance. as well as address some of the concerns that have been raised by the opponents. One of the other things that I'd like to remind the council as well as the audience is that while there has been a lot of opposition of this proposal in the neighboring area, that not everybody opposes it, and I don't oppose it, and I'm a landowner in that neighborhood. So while there has been opposition, it's not unanimous, and I think it's important that we're respectful of each other's rights as property owners here in the Dalles. As I mentioned, my building partner over here, his name is Rob. He and I are friends and building partners. We live in the Dalles and Hood River. Cumulatively, we've been here in this area for almost 2 decades. In my short life, seems like a long time. I've been here in the Dalles now for 12 years. I'm a nurse at Mid-Columbia Medical Center. I'm actually headed to work later this evening, so I'm sort of working the double shift, if you will. We're small business owners as well. Rob works as a community educator. We both work on real property development here in the Dalles. Emphasis on small single-family homes and residential properties that add value and character to our neighborhoods. I also work in an area of real estate where I manage rental properties, many of which are my own. And the reason that I do that is because I think housing is a very important thing. And as many of you know, we definitely have a problem with available housing here in the city of the Dalles, and that's been identified at a local level as well as at a state level. We're also friends who wish to invest. Obviously, we made considerable investment purchasing this lot and plan to continue to invest in this community. So we're here and we're on board with the community. As Mr. Harris said, this minor partition was approved by the Planning Commission. There was the extra condition that was added that it would be processed as an administrative action in the future if we were to turn in a building permit to construct this. But for the part of the application that is just for the land use, all that is required is basically the land use information. I think that I accidentally, by over-disclosing, may have confused a lot of people who were at that public hearing by providing architectural renderings of what we had been thinking about constructing on that property. That was inappropriate for that hearing because the hearing was not about what was being built. It was about the partition of the lot. And I'm a pretty open person. I don't really try to hide what I'm doing, and so I had no problem providing that. But I think in a way it has been really detrimental to this process because it's involved a lot of the public commentary and what we're building. And that's not what this hearing is. This is not a hearing about what we wish to construct. It is a hearing about the land use specifically. Those drawings will not be in tonight's presentation. So I think the proposal is pretty clear. We're lowering the width with the partition. The reduction of 7.6% on the minimum lot width is normally handled administratively. So if this were just applying for that lot width, this would have never even gone to the Planning Commission. It would be handled within the planning office. The 12.2% reduction in minimum lot size is considered a quasi-judicial issue. That would have gone to Planning Commission and would have been noticed. But in this process, if the lot that we were considering was 113 feet larger, so 4,501 square feet, it would be less than 10%. This would be a ministerial process. This wouldn't have even gone to Planning Commission. And that is how the land use ordinance in the town is written. And so while I understand many of the opponents feel like this has somehow been underhanded or we've done something illegal here, like this is the law. It's very clearly outlined. If you read the ordinance, this is exactly what it says, and we've followed that process the whole way. Additionally, all other setbacks, easements, utility easements, height restrictions, and parking requirements will be met on the lot. That's part of the building process. So when you put in your application to build on it, you need to show that you meet all of those building requirements, that you respect the easements, that you don't build something that's too tall for the zone. So that's where the building aspects of this proposal exist. So here's another map overview. So our vision is to partition this lot into the two lots down the middle. As Mr. Harris pointed out, this is not across the street from either of these streets that are coming in here. One of the adjustments that we made to our plans for the sort of site plan involved only having one access to the property as a way of minimizing any sort of impact that this lot would have on flow down 19th Street, because that's one of our main arterial streets. It's close to the school, it's close to the hospital. We would like to minimize the impact of this partition. That's one way we can do that, is by making it have the same impact from the street as if it were a single-family home on one lot. The considerations that Mr. Harris discussed about livability, appearance, neighborhood compatibility, environment, those are the approval criteria for this partition. The plan review that was conducted by the planning department staff, as well as the agenda staff report that was prepared by the planning department senior staff and city attorney, have both evaluated and determined that our plan meets the relevant criteria for approval. Some of the factors that are not for consideration, and I've touched on this a little bit, intended future plans with the constructed homes is not part of the consideration criteria for this partition. The type or style of structures that are being proposed is not part. The cost or expenses involved in constructing the residence doesn't matter. The probable valuation, and that's taken directly from the appeal paperwork, probable valuation of future yet unconstructed structures, that's not part of the decision criteria for this, nor is the character of the applicants. As is customary in the Dalles for any new residential construction, the home will meet city building standards, and those are the standards that were discussed by Mr. Harris. If you walk into the planning department, they have a full list of them. You can pick it up, and it says, here's a checklist of all of the standards of homes that are built in the Dalles. And to me, as somebody who builds houses, that's the standard that all homes that are constructed in our community are held to. So I understand the Planning Commission putting this additional level of, we want this to run back through administrative action, but at the same time, the homes that we're proposing to construct are still homes in the Dalles, just like any other home that's being built here, and I believe they should be held to the same standards. So there's a list of very objective standards. It says your home must have windowsills, it must have a front entry, it must have a certain slope of roof. Those standards are in place so that the homes that are constructed in the Dalles are of character and of quality, and we certainly intend to meet and hopefully exceed those standards by building beautiful homes. But I don't, in this whole process, we have added this additional level of review, which is okay, but I guess in adding that condition, I'd like to know how the homes that we're constructing are very different than other homes that are constructed in the city of the Dalles for that condition to be applied. The reduction of the minimum lot width will not affect livability or appearance of the neighborhood, as we will exceed setbacks from the street and be at lower elevations than neighboring houses. Again, this is where we're talking about how this isn't about what we're building, but our plans plan to do this, and that's not part of it, but those are our plans. We will meet required off-street parking and provide a single driveway to the property so that it minimizes interruption of arterial flow on 16th Street. All mature trees and landscaping will be maintained as much as possible, especially along 19th Street, so that people driving past will not affect the appearance of the neighborhood, and also to provide privacy to neighboring properties. There are residential lots smaller than this that exist in the RL zone and other subdivisions, not in this one, but in other parts of the Dalles. The neighborhood density with 2 homes constructed will be at a density of 4.19 units per gross acre. However, that number is a little different depending on if you consider the church as part of it or not. But it does live well within the guidelines of 3 to 6 units per gross acre as outlined by the land use ordinance. And as I've said, we will honor all setbacks, easements, right-of-ways, and restrictions This project supports the developmental goals for the comprehensive plan for the city of the Dalles. We believe that this property developed with residential construction will be more useful than its current use as just sort of a residential park, for lack of better words. It's unlandscaped, it's unmaintained, it just has some high-growing grass, which has been recently cut down because of the fire danger. But the vacant lot will help create much-needed additional housing near schools, near the Columbia Gorge Community College, near the hospital, which is something that the Dalles really does need, and all the people in the Dalles really need that. I really, in this whole process, one of the things I really have to consider a lot is I understand that there's a lot of people in the neighborhood who don't want this in their neighborhood, and I can understand that gut reaction. I'm empathetic to that, but I also look at, on the flip side of that, is how many people say, I can't afford a home in the Dalles? How many people say, I'm looking for a rental and I can't find one? And we all know these people, and the Dalles is in need of more housing. That's a well-established thing. There's a shortage of about 1,700 houses in the next 20 years, and those they've got to come from somewhere. Somebody's got to build them, and that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to help support housing for the city of the Dalles, and that's this kind of urban infill is what that looks like. Constructing new homes adds commerce and jobs to our local economy and boosts the tax base. A single larger home could have a much larger visual impact. And so this goes back, Councilor Curtis, you were talking about...
Long Curtis.
Long Curtis. Apologies. You were talking about the physical appearance of things. It has a lot to do with what's built. And one very large home could have a much more impactful appearance than having two smaller lots that have, for example...
I think we're defining appearance a little differently.
Okay. We wish to build attractive homes that will add value and character to the neighborhood. The Dalles is in need of additional housing, and this maximizes the usefulness of this lot. And our plans will utilize this parcel in a way that aligns with the neighborhood and with providing much-needed housing for all citizens of the Dalles. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them.
I guess I had one question. You referred to residential lots smaller than 4389 currently exist in the RL zone in other parts of this town. I was just wondering, maybe Mr. Harris could help fact check that. That
caught my attention too.
Is that true?
I'll have to defer to Dawn Hurd, my senior planner, if she's aware of any of those properties.
So a few of you may remember many years ago, the S-curve on Scenic Drive, where Radio Way and the old KODL station was. We had a density concern there with a minor partition at that time. And the properties over Garrison were actually smaller than 5,000 square foot, some of the parcels that were over in that area. So we could easily do a query on our GIS and take a look at those properties in the RL zone that were less than 5,000 square feet. It would just take a little bit of time, but I do know there are at least, I know a few not far from here. Well,
There's one at 18th and Dry Hollow.
Anything else? We're almost to the end of 15 minutes.
To answer your question, Councilor Elliott, they do exist. They're not numerous because the RL zone is intended in general to have lots that are approximately 5,000 square feet and up to a certain density. I think the minimum density within the city limits. I don't know the exact number, but lots in that zone are designed to have characteristics between about 5,000 square feet, and I think the upper end is around 25,000 square feet. And so most of the subdivisions that are created in that zone, you'll find those kinds of characteristics. But sometimes there are exceptions, and there are exceptions to this rule. If you look across that whole, it's the southern, east-west connect southern whole RL zone of the city, you will find other lots that are smaller than this in that zone.
If this doesn't go in your favor, would you, is it in your plan to build just a single family home on that lot?
It's difficult to say what we would do moving forward. This motion and this entire process began in April, and now it's July. And so obviously our desire to be in construction, and on top of that, the building codes being taken over by the state of Oregon, you're looking at 2 to 3 months for plan review. So even if this evening, Planning Commission said yes, or the City Council said yes, we would still be months out from getting plans put together, depending on whether or not the City Council decided to reverse the condition that we need to go through another administrative action to get our building plans reviewed. That process is quite time consuming. If we did have that process, we submitted our building plans, the planning department referred it to the Planning Commission, the public hearing was held, depending on how it went, the appellants could appeal again, it could come back to you guys. I mean, we're looking at a timeline that's stretching into winter to even start. So it's very difficult to say at this time what we would do with it. I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you, but we were at this point planning on being building.
We're at the end of the 15 minutes. At this point, is there anyone else who wishes to present testimony in favor of the application?
Jim Wilcox, 416 West 7th. I've got 30 years in the real estate business here, and I know the town pretty well. There's a whole row of homes on smaller than 5,000 square feet on Wright Drive, Mill Creek Crossing. In fact, almost every lot there is under 5,000 square feet, and there's all sizes of homes, everywhere from 1,100 up to probably over 2,000 square feet. All of those, every one of them is on a sub-lot. Now, that was in a PUD, and they did the PUD so they didn't have to pay for city streets. I mean, there's different reasons you do things. But you accepted a report here a few months ago that you decided we have enough property to build on. It's all there. Now you have somebody come in, wants to use this, and within the guidelines of the ordinances you have, you deny this and you're going against your ordinances. I think you need to change your ordinances if you really don't want this to go. Because they have met the ordinances. Now, if you wonder why you're not getting more building, have somebody go through this every time they try to do something. Time is money. And the added time that's been added by saying you've got to show us your plans before you can go ahead, that's more. Now, I understand having things compatible with the neighborhood. I was the biggest thorn in the side and a very big pain in the ass to the planning department a few years ago because they were allowing manufactured homes to be set in on an angle and saying the front door faced the street. Or manufactured home being set in, you cut a door in the end where the bedroom is, hang a little porch over it and call it the front of a house. So, yeah, we got problems, but they're already all over town. Not that you want it to continue, but they're already all over town. You're talking about putting a line on paper today. You're not talking about what's going to be built there. With the conditions that have been put there, you get to look at that later, at least the planning office does. So if you want people to build and to do the best they can, you have to let them do it. And you have to honor the ordinances that are in place. You don't honor those ordinances in place, what's a developer going to look at? I mean, how are they going to, why would they want to build here if they don't, if the ordinances that they're looking at, that they read in a very thick book, don't apply? If every time they're going to have to go through this. Now, every time I saw a neighborhood come up against a building, a good one is at the top of 4th Street grade, there's a building there that was done by from the Cascade Housing. It was a group thing. It was going to ruin the neighborhood. It was the best building in the neighborhood, and every place around it upgraded because of it. Same, West Park Addition, everything upgraded when that went in. Neighbors didn't want it. So I have seen, I can't tell you how many times, where the new construction brought the neighborhood up. I live in a little neighborhood, it's built in probably 1910 to 1925, all 50 by 100 lots. Several different types of home, but basically this same type of home. Now, I can understand if you're a neighbor, and those are all 60s, 70s built homes up there, except across the street, which were built after 2000. I can understand not wanting a Frank Lloyd Wright home in there. It wouldn't match up. I can understand not having a manufactured home or a modular home, whatever you want to call it, with no relief on the front of it, and
and even though they build them with knife ends on them, have one stuck in there and they just put a door in a bedroom to call it the front. I get that, and that's what we have to watch. But please pay attention. If you really want housing, you can't continue to make it harder. And this process is a bear cat, and it's not cheap. So,
Your time's up.
Mr. Wilk,
Done.
I have a question.
Sure.
Did I hear you accuse us of not following the ordinance?
no, I said you have to, when you have an ordinance and somebody meets it, you really have to follow that, or change the ordinance.
Right, but we are following the ordinance. We're following all of the steps.
I'm
Correct?
saying if you don't approve this, if you don't uphold your planning commission, you'll be going against the ordinance because your staff has pointed out how they have met all these criteria. Now, as far as what goes on the lot,
The
different
ordinance
process.
says that we have to take the word of the planning commission. Why are we even having this meeting?
That's public process. That's how the drawings got into it. That wasn't something they proposed, that's something the public asked for. He provided in the spirit of good neighbor.
Right.
And that's
It's the
why it got drug
ordinance.
into his
It's the
report, which
process.
really wouldn't have been there normally.
So one of the things that I think needs to be considered is, a lot of these questions that we're asking is because we've never been through this process.
Yeah.
I think, when was the last time it was done?
2 weeks ago.
About 5 years ago.
So we're kind of stumbling through it, and please give us at least that latitude to figure out what's going on.
A lot of these were adopted before 2006, but quite a few changes after 2006. And then the economy went to the point where there wasn't any building. And now you're running into the situation where people are trying to infill. So you're going back and you're running into these questions, you're running into the people that don't like it. But the ordinances are there, and I'm sure you're going to find things you don't like and you want to change. But that's what's there now, and that's what people depend on to move forward. So, I know it's hard. Try not to confuse the two processes.
All right. Anyone else who wants to present testimony in favor of the application? Okay. So at this time, I'll ask for testimony from the appellants. And again, the suggested time for the appellants is 15 minutes. Please come to the microphone, state your name and mailing address, and proceed.
If I may, while they're preparing that, can I hand out some documents here really quickly? These are just this is just the application that is submitted as part of an adjustment, and on the second page, I'm sorry, I understand. Are you breaking the rules?
No, that's okay. Just want to make sure you got what I was after.
All right, well, first off, thank you, City Council and Honorable Mayor. My name is Alex Maya. I live on 1601 East 19th Street, and I'm here to appeal the proposed partition on 1605 East 19th Street, which is directly adjacent to us. A couple things I wanted to address as quick housekeeping is during the initial public hearing and even tonight, I've been hearing a lot of arguments about how we are not here to review the type of dwelling or dwelling proposal as part of this process. In lieu of section 1009003030, section A6, it says that as part of the application, the number and type of dwelling units proposed where known and appropriate are to be disclosed. So that is part of the application and part of the review criteria. So I would really like to just squelch that and allow us to discuss those things. Another item is, we've heard a lot of ifs. If it was an additional 100 and X square feet, or if it was this, then we wouldn't be sitting here. But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't meet the criteria. It is below those minimum thresholds. And as such, we have this due process here in place to have those discussions. You've already seen various graphs of the proposed area. This is a zoomed-in photo there showing the lot there in the middle, 1605. As you can see, it's already one of the smaller lots within the neighborhood. These yellow hash lines, this was taken from your zoning map. These yellow hash lines show that it sits right smack dab in the middle of an RL zone. If we zoom out a little further, you can see the boundary of the RL zone here with this black line. And the nearest location where we come and make contact with a medium or a high density zone is a minimum of a half mile. There's an argument in the public hearing 2 weeks ago that I sat in where we were talking about how, oh, the next lot adjacent is part of the RM. That's clearly not the case here. So with that, I'd like to get into the reasons for the appeal. Reason number one is legality. Councilor Brown, I believe it was you that asked in that hearing 2 weeks ago whether that adjustment was being considered legal or not because of the prohibition stated in 10.3.080.020 that states that they are prohibited if they are to allow an increase in density in the RL zone. I was here at that hearing to hear the arguments, and Director Harris kindly defined what an increase in density was. In that case, it didn't apply because the comment was made that you were not taking one lot and dividing it into multiple lots. So because that was not the case, it's not being considered an increase in density. I looked even today to try to get the audio from that hearing. It's not yet posted, otherwise we could have heard it verbatim, but that is ultimately what was being said. In this case, you are taking one lot, making it into two, so you are technically, according to that definition, creating an increase in density. Reason two for the appeal has to do with the review criteria. So if you look at the handout that I gave you just a moment ago on page 2, it includes all the justification of requests. And it states for an application to be approved, it must meet the criteria in either section A or B. It does not state that it needs to meet some of the criteria, which means that it's implying that you must meet all the criteria in either one of those two sections. So I'd like to look at the first item, which is 8.1. It says, if in the residential zone, show that the proposal will not significantly detract from the livability or appearance of the residential area. So again, we've gone in circles with this today. We're using words, livability, character, appearance, and the excuse is that those can't be defined, yet we're using them as a way to justify an application. If you can't define it, if you're going to use it as part of the application process, then I think it needs to be also used as a way to litigate. And so in the last hearing on the 25th, it was said numerous times that the only way that that's been argued has been in opinion. And so what I would like to do would hopefully be to present some evidence to the contrary that's not just opinion. So the first item that I wanted to address is rental properties. We all know there's a need for them. By the applicant's own admission, if we go to biggerpockets.com, it's a forum that he belongs to, you can see that he's an investor that wants to have 100 rental homes by the time he's 40. So we know that it's...
criteria when he's getting personal about that.
We know that is the intent. It's been shared with us as neighbors. He came through and met with many members of the neighborhood.
But you need to address the criteria, not, his personal background.
Okay. So it was shared with us that the likely intent would be to utilize it for rental properties. So looking at a study posted on Realtor.com back in March of 2016, it says that an increased concentration of rental homes results in a decreased property value of 13.8%. The only two things that are worse are strip clubs and bad schools, which thankfully we're not looking at doing either one of those two. If you'd like, that link there takes you to that study that I found this information from. The second criteria with regards to livability has to do with minimum lot sizes. So citizens, myself and my family included, we paid a premium to get into this neighborhood. It has an appeal, it has a character. We've all heard the term location, 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 right? And there's times where you are paying a premium for that. And this neighborhood, this area is in fact one of those instances. I'm not trying to paint myself or others as an elitist, but if we wanted something on a smaller footprint, there's plenty of other areas within the city of the Dalles that are already established to support that. And so we paid, and as did many here in the room, to maintain that semi-rural feel. And we're looking at potentially removing that potential from us. To look at another factual example, there was approximately 1,650, I think it was 1,632 square foot home on 19th Street that sold recently for $217,000. There were similar homes in the RMRH district in that 1,650 square foot dimensions that sold in the exact same time frame, and I get it, other things play into that. But the only three instances I found sold for $175,000, $187,000, and $205,000, which respectively are 19% less, 14% less, and 6% less than what we see in this semi-rural area that we're paying the premium for. So another item with minimum lot sizes has to do with the American Planning Association. They stated on their site that controlling density permits adequate planning of community facilities and utilities on the basis of the number of families per acre. Where density is regulated, it is often more possible to predict the future requirements for school facilities, for sewer and water system capacities, and for the many other facilities affected by the population density. So personally, we moved into the neighborhood in December of last year. So we're new to the area, love the area. We've tried for months, leading right up to when we moved in, to get into Dry Hollow Elementary. You can call the principal, and I'm sure she'll know us by name. We could not get in until 2 days before we moved. There was one opening in the 4th grade class that opened due to someone transferring out that allowed us to be able to come in. So the school was full, the classes were full. There's a density issue already, and we're looking at potentially increasing that by adding additional homes in an already congested area. You guys have already heard of various complaints from Dry Hollow Elementary itself and the residents in the neighborhood with regards to congestion and traffic. Problem worse by adding more homes in an already congested area. And then another risk that actually came to fruition here fairly recently is an increased fire risk. So yes, I understand that maintaining it as one lot doesn't guarantee that that home won't be directly next to ours, but splitting it will essentially guarantee that the home will be, one of the homes will be within 10 to 12 feet of our home. We just witnessed a fire on 16th in Nevada where the home where the fire originated was decimated, and the one directly adjacent to it suffered some severe damage because of proximity. And we're putting myself and others in the area at risk by just trying to cram as many houses as we can in there. When we talk about minimum building sizes, again, according to the American Planning Association, a large minimum building size requirement may be supported because it preserves the character of the neighborhood. It's almost like we're taking, I underline that specifically because we're taking it verbatim out of some of the sections in Ludo. To further that, a study posted on Realtor.com in October of last year talks about how homeowners associations are also establishing minimum building size requirements because they say it preserves the character of the neighborhood and the property values. The Planning Commission, is part of the compatibility review, which is where they would be looking at the livability, the character impacts, and those things. Did they do this, or did they let it down? Because it sure doesn't seem like it's drawing a comparison to the character of this particular neighborhood. So if you look at Ludo section 10.3.040.010, it does state that the purpose of a compatibility review is done as part of an application review procedure and addresses the issue of compatibility with overall neighborhood character in terms of the design of buildings, their massing, which is how closely congested they are to each other, and architectural features. And it goes on and on to talk about established neighborhoods, which you guys do define. An established neighborhood is one where 65% of the platted lots are developed. In this particular neighborhood, developed, and so we definitely meet that criteria. And then if we look at some of the homes in the area, I just spent 10 minutes looking on Zillow to find some of the housing sizes here. You can see that in 14 nearby homes, the average square footage is 2,300 square feet. As was discussed in the original public hearing, the planned proposed dwellings here are 1,200 square feet, which is 52% of the size of the average home. So I would voice that this is not in line with the character of the neighborhood. Third reason for the appeal, justification of request item A2, so the next bullet item, states that if more than one adjustment is being requested, the cumulative effect of the adjustments results in a project which is still consistent with the overall purpose of the zone. So the application request is to divide a lot, adjust the minimum lot size and the frontage. So 3 items are being adjusted here. So it does state that we have to align with the criteria of the overall purpose of the zone. So what is the purpose of the RL zone? The purpose of the RL zone is listed in 5.010.010 of Ludo Ordinance 98.1222. Sorry, there's a lot of numbers here. Says that the RL district is intended to provide low-density family residential areas for present and future needs, together with a full range of urban services. So I've already discussed how, again, based on the American Planning Association, these zoning minimums allow for city officials to effectively plan for current and future needs. If these minimums are changed, the whim of the Planning Commission for convenience or to reverse some pressure that maybe is being presented by the Gorge Council, then the city is not going to be able to accurately plan. I already shared a couple instances where we're having a difficulty, it feels, to meet present needs, and now we're looking at potentially making the situation worse. The fourth reason for the appeal. If we move on to the next subset of items, justification of request for Section B, it says that item 2 says granting the adjustment is the minimum necessary to allow the use of the site. So what that means is, in layman's terms, is if they don't move forward with this partition adjustment, nothing can be built on the lot. We know that that's not true. The existing lot is fully capable of being developed as it stands, in alignment with the RL zoning it is housed in. And as I mentioned earlier, it would already be one of the smaller lots in the area. This would allow one home in the current lot. Neighbors in the established neighborhood, we all voiced at the last public hearing, we have no issue with one home being put in there. It makes sense, and especially if it has a look and feel of the character of the existing neighborhood. However, we strongly object to the lot split and size adjustment resulting in 2 homes.
So what about if somebody built a home and then also built an outbuilding as another residence?
That's a very real risk. One of the things that is stated as part of an ADU is that one of the homes has to be owner occupied. So we would at least know for certain that it wouldn't be 2 rental properties available there. One of them would be an owner occupied unit. And that to me would bring some comfort level knowing that they're invested. They made it a large investment, just like I did, in the neighborhood and are willing to continue to improve it.
You got 2 minutes.
Okay. So one of the items I wanted to touch on briefly is the Gorge Planning Commission study did dictate that there is a need for high-end and for entry-level homes planned for capacity. It's been stated that this neighborhood caters much more to the higher-end style homes and should be retained for that use. The 5th item has to do with approval conditions. So a condition contingency was set on this adjustment, which was already talked about tonight. It would require that the building permit design criteria be reviewed via a public hearing. I have 2 responses to that. One, this would be conducted by the same planning commission that did not hear the unanimous, at the time, unanimous opposition of that neighborhood. And as shown by the continuous outcry, the petition that you saw, as well as this appeal, we have little hope that this contingency will provide a fruitful outcome. And 2, the citizens have already provided feedback on the public hearing. We've already said, no, we don't want this. And we're doing so again today. So our request is that you build one home on one lot that aligns with the character of the neighborhood. So to close, just want you to take a moment, not look at this just on paper, but ask yourselves in good faith, could you allow this adjustment to go through in good conscience based on the overwhelming evidence that has been presented to get it? It is prohibited by the ordinance, as we're talking about aligning with the ordinances. It is prohibited by those based on the definition that we heard 2 weeks ago. It is breaking the character of the neighborhood, and in doing so, creating potential financial impacts to citizens due to rental properties, minimum lot sizes, minimum building sizes. There are multiple adjustments that do not align with the purpose of the zone. The adjustment is not necessary for beneficial use of the property. And as I said, the approval contingency was put in place that has already been declined by my affected established neighborhood, many of whom I think you're going to hear from tonight as well. So with that, I'll close, open it up if there's any questions. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's sitting there on the machine. I can email it to you as well.
I just want to clarify, when you said Gorge Council, did you mean Gorge Commission? Or did you?
I misspoke.
Okay, I just want to make sure
Yes.
we're talking about the same thing. Thanks.
Okay.
As you can tell, I'm a little nervous.
Other persons who are opposed to the application that would like to speak? Again, come to the microphone, state your name and mailing address.
Sure.
For the record, my name is Dan Hamill. I reside at 2005 Lewis Street, and I'm here in opposition of this partition. I'm handing out some things that are some key points that I want to address, but due to the time limitations, and we've already heard a lot of it, the first 2 subjects I just want to real briefly talk about. There is a covenants for the area that has some guidelines, and on the current warranty deed, it basically says it shall follow them. And so things like, we've heard 1,200 square foot, within the covenants, it actually says that the minimum is 1,250. in square feet. And then as well as points to the city with the low density zoning for it, the neighborhood compatibility, it clearly states that that has to go through and go through it. And I think that's kind of what the planning report was to do. As a professional that has 29 plus years in the fire service, items 3 and 4 are what I feel is the most important to address. Fire safety is number one. You heard about fire safety being increased. There was a recent newspaper article in one of the Kentucky newspapers. It was titled, "Too Close for Comfort, Compact Neighborhoods See Spreading Fires." This is a start of developing compact neighborhoods within our community. In essence, within the fire service, we look at compact housing basically as the row housing of yesterday is today's compact neighborhoods. Why do we do that? It's creating significant challenges for us. If we look at just our fire history right here in the Dalles, it was mentioned about the Nevada Street. Not only did it destroy the house and create damage to the house just to the east, how about the house to the south that received significant damage? And the vehicle that had damage as well as power poles. With very significant distance between them, the pure radiant heat from a structure fire, which will exceed 1,400 degrees, has a serious impact. Add the winds that we saw just today, and the general winds coming out of the west, we can see a very significant. And I look at the other two lots, and I'm looking at the future. If we let this one happen, and the next two vacant lots be divided, that's 8 homes in a row. That's about a 1 acre section that even exceeds then that gross number. But one house catching on fire is going to go from house to house. West 8th Street in Pentland, 2 homes were destroyed. An additional one was heavily damaged, as well as water damage on another home down below because of the significant amount of water that had to be used to control that fire. East 14th, another two homes destroyed from a fire, radiant heat, and had distances that exceed what we will see between these homes if this is allowed to go through. Challenges that the fire service is seeing through articles within fire service or Fire Rescue Magazine, access to the sides and rear of the structure for firefighters, that's a challenge. We already have a challenge enough with the limited resources that we have to protect this community. We start adding those roadblocks, and it's going to cause potential increase in conflagrations of fire to happen. This community lost a significant amount of town years ago. We don't want to see that again. Laddering the structures. Open floor plans is what's common in these types of homes. That creates fire, heat, and smoke to rapidly spread throughout the home, not only creating then hazards to the neighbors, but to the occupants of the homes. School safety. I've been on record and said it's not a matter of if it's going to happen, it is a matter of when it's going to happen. And until we figure out, both the city and the school district have admitted to the safety of our children in that neighborhood. And until that's resolved, if we make steps that's going to increase the density and traffic in that neighborhood, we are purely negligent as a community on the safety of our children. Every day, I have seen near misses at that school. I realize it's out of our hands and a lot as the parents, but if we allow things that we have control over to keep it from increasing, we need to look at those and make the right choices. Thank you.
Anybody else who wishes to testify regarding opposition?
I think we need to limit this testimony to what we're dealing with. We're dealing with dirt. We're not dealing with houses. We're not dealing with traffic. We're dealing with a lot line adjustment or a minor partition. I think that these other things will come at a hearing down the road someplace. I
think I allowed that, and I was thinking about that because he was addressing density, and that is an issue here. So that's why I allowed that. Go ahead.
My name is Cherry Snodgrass. I'm a resident of 1826 Minnesota Street. I reside within, I believe, 100 feet of the proposed development and was at the hearing. Thank you for your time. Appeal. I thought that Mr. Maya's points were well taken. I'm not sure if any of the materials from the opposition to the partition were available, but there was a presentation made by one of the neighbors, Mr. Ed Goodman, who had been the original inhabitant of the Oak Grove development. And that was, I thought, fairly compelling as far as many of us paid a premium price for lots in that neighborhood based on the size of the lots. And perhaps naively thought that because they were zoned and measured to be that size, that it would stay that way. But as I see it very simplistically, the decision tonight is that you change that rule and partition these lots. Then you come down to opinion. Is there a correlation between the value of homes in that neighborhood and the size of those lots? And you've heard arguments both ways. I, of course, lean towards the fact that larger lots maintain the value and would prefer to reside in a neighborhood where there are owners, not renters. The question was asked to Mr. Blum about would he still want to develop in the previous hearing. And I believe the answer at that time was no, that he was looking to make rentals. Now, and he's purported to be a good builder and probably would produce a very desirable home. We, the neighbors, would simply like to preserve owners and would like you to weigh in on a decision to preserve the lots in their current form and not subdivide.
All right, thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Steve Hunt. I'm at P.O. Box 81, The Dalles, Oregon. What I'm a copy of the applicability section of the municipal code. Not because you're not familiar with it, it's been addressed already, but so that you have it directly in front of you. This proposal is for a partition and 2 adjustments. The partition by itself would be useless. It would divide the lot into 2 lots that could not be used for a housing unit, without the adjustment. The adjustment would allow 2 units on what is now on a property that now allows 1 unit. So I'd refer you to, unless listed in subsection B of this section, the regulations in the LUDO may be adjusted in the adjustment review process. Section B, adjustments are prohibited for the following items: to allow an increase in density in the RL zone. 2 units where right now 1 is allowed. It's just clear and evident that that is an increase in density. Mr. Harris referred to this. He said it does not increase the density beyond what is recognized in the as acceptable. And that may be true. The city code doesn't say beyond what is recognized as acceptable. It says increase density. Several times the hearing 2 weeks ago has been mentioned tonight. I would say that this applies also there. I see that it's on the agenda as an action item. I urge your discussion of it there as well and your consideration of it in this proposal, and I urge you to reject both. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else? All right, so,
I'm Lorraine Hunt, Post Office Box 81, the Dalles, and I turned in this to the city and it hasn't been mentioned before 5 o'clock, and it should have been mentioned as a...
we all have a copy of this.
Yes.
Okay, it wasn't mentioned, so I'm going to get a copy. Okay. And then just a few comments. The comment was the city needs more housing for people who want to rent. And I don't have the document in front of me, but a document, and it's one of the city planning documents, it says that the medium density and the high density areas have enough area to build these duplexes, et cetera. There's adequate area in those RM and RH zones to build these duplexes and all kinds of other things. It's not necessary to come to the RL zone and try to build something that's not allowed there, because according to the ordinance, it isn't allowed. And so somebody mentioned honoring the ordinances in place, and this ordinance is in place, the one that says adjustments are prohibited for the following items: to allow an increase in density in the RL zone. And it was just explained that when you put 2 houses instead of 1 on the same property, that's an increase in density, pure and simple, and that's a definition from the city code. So just to, the planning commission was, to uphold the planning commission was mentioned, and also the city council is going through a process that's new to you, and we understand that. This is also new to the citizens that are dealing with it in these areas. So at the first meeting, the staff report didn't mention this part B, number 6. It wasn't mentioned. And so the planning commission didn't have the benefit of that information when they made their decision. So we don't fault them at all. This was found out when citizens looked into the law. And so here we're presenting it to you as a, as something that we found out when we looked at the city code. So we're not faulting the planning commission for their decision. They didn't get full information. It was discovered when citizens went through the code. So, but now the information is there, and hopefully it will be considered in making these decisions. And the other thing I want to mention is, both neighborhoods wrote a 2-piece article that I know is a 2-piece piece of information that was sent to the city council members, and there were signatures on those. And in our neighborhood, there were like 30 signatures, and there were like 16 or 17 on 13th Street alone, the street that has all these huge properties, the same as he mentioned on 19th Street. It's big, 0.5 acres, 1 acre, et cetera. So that was, people in the neighborhood really had a lot to say about that in the petition. So I just want to remind you about that.
all right, thank you.
Very much.
So I'm not sure about this paragraph, but it says, following the conclusion of the appellant and opponent's testimony, ask for any testimony from persons who are not in favor of or opposed to the application, but who wish to present testimony or ask questions. I don't know who that person could be, but somebody in the middle row. Okay.
Someone in the back row.
All right, so we didn't have any, so at this time, the applicant is entitled to provide rebuttal argument, again, 15 minutes. Mr. Blum.
Thank you for hearing the opposition, and thank you for the folks who are in opposal of this proposition for being respectful. I appreciate that. So a couple of points that I just want to make crystal clear. So the decision to approve this minor position was based on evidence-based findings, and those findings were done by our city staff in the planning department, and they're professionals, and this is what they do for a living. And so when I approached city staff and asked them for the feasibility of doing this, they laid out very clearly to me what the process was. And this isn't just unique to me. Anyone can do this by walking in their front door and asking, I own this piece of land, what can I do with this? Or you don't even need to own it. You can walk in and say, I'm considering buying this piece of land. What do I need to know about this piece of land before I purchase it? We conducted our due diligence. The adjustment process was very clear when we bought the land. And so we continued with the purchase contingent on the approval of the partition by the Planning Commission, which we were granted. So we knew what we were getting into. We held off on the purchase of the land until the partition was granted, and it was granted by the Planning Commission. And at this point, we are the owners of this land that we bought with a certain expectation based on the laws that are laid out in the land use ordinance. And that is why we believe this minor partition should be approved, is because that's what the rule of law says. Something else that I've noticed just as we've discussed this is that I didn't know that there were so many lawyers in the room, because everybody seems to have their own interpretation, legal interpretation of what the code says. But for those kinds of matters, I would refer to the actual lawyers in the room, like Mr. Parker, who's the city attorney who has reviewed this case. So while I think that you can read the words and interpret whatever you like, whatever you want to see in those words, you can see it how you see it. But what really matters is the word of the law as it's interpreted by a legal professional. And so that is what we would like to defer to. In this community, I think, as was mentioned earlier, it's really important that we don't process development by consensus. If one person wishes to build something or do something, you don't need 14,000 citizens in the Dalles to weigh in on that process. We have a city council, we have a planning commission, and we have professional planning staff to guide us through this process. And as I see it, that's what has been done effectively in this process. And so I hope in making your decision on this matter that you guys consider who is giving you what kinds of information and consider that information as such. I also just wanted to directly address a few of the other things. To Mr. Hamill, I take fire safety seriously. I own a number of houses in the Dalles. It is a serious concern. My girlfriend lives directly above the Memalus fire, and we almost were evacuated 2 days ago. So where you're sitting, but I take your concerns very seriously. However, I don't think partitioning this lot will increase or decrease the fire safety in any different way than building one home or two home in another zone of the city. All setbacks that are established by how we do building in the Dalles will be honored, and those are put in place to protect for fires and to give space so that firemen can do their work if there is a fire. The other thing is, as a vacant lot, there is an amount of dry grass and brush on that lot. That is also a fire hazard. So if you imagine somebody walking down the road, pops off the road, smokes a cigarette, and throws it in our dead grass there on our undeveloped lot, that is also a fire risk. So I think you can see that issue either way. But we certainly do. I really respect the work he does, and it's a serious concern right now, and it's very hot. That's all I've got. I thank you guys for your consideration of our proposal.
Mr. Maya, do you have anything further you want to add based on what his rebuttal was? Okay. This is the conclusion of the testimony, so I'm going to ask the council members, do you feel like you have enough information to make a decision?
Yes?
Yes?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. At this point, would you like to proceed with deliberations?
Did you close the public hearing? I'm not sure if
I think he's asking.
It says after this that I close the public hearing. So would you like to proceed to deliberations?
Yes. Yes.
Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So at this time, then, the public hearing is now closed, and it's time for the council's deliberation on this matter. The staff recommendation is set forth in the agenda staff report, and there are also other options for the council as set forth in the staff report. So, who wants to deliberate?
Well, I think it's really interesting that the Oak Grove subdivision actually had a declaration of covenants and conditions and restrictions. I wasn't aware of that from previously reading our packet. And to me, that says that when people bought those properties, that they had an expectation, because it's on the warranty deed, that's how it was going to be in their property. And as I said earlier, I think it does change changing the lot size does actually change the nature of that subdivision.
If I were to make a decision based on emotion, I would vote against this lot change size, or lot size change, excuse me. I've spent a lot of time up there looking at that neighborhood. I like it the way it is. I think there's probably a lot of things that the builder could do to construct something that would come close to blending in with the neighborhood, but that's not what we're here to decide. As I was with the last one of these hearings, I'm always concerned that we've definitely got the high ground here legally. So, yeah, that's real. If, as I asked before, are we absolutely sure that we haven't interpreted something wrong, or?
If I can, Councilor Brown, I don't want to be flip here. There's no absolute guarantee, but obviously it's up to the council to interpret the ordinance and to adopt interpretation of the language, and we're recommending that you take a certain interpretation in terms of the standards of character, livability, and so forth. But I think Mr. Harris and I are very confident that we feel the criteria has been met, that the Planning Commission made a sound decision, and that's why we recommended that you uphold it. If this were appealed to the Land Use Board of Appeals, it's possible that LUBA could decide your interpretation wasn't correct. We would argue that it was if you followed our interpretation, but that's ultimately up to you to decide what you think is reasonable. But we think the decision was sound and that it can be defended.
Thank you.
I have a question. I don't get to vote, but I get to participate in the discussion. So just to help me understand this issue of livability and appearance, the part of the review goes into the dictionary and provides sort of a general definition, and then states that it's it's satisfied. But then when it later there is a question about the nature of the neighborhood high-end homes. It states this: this does not address relevant review criteria. The term high-end home is not defined and is very subjective in nature. There was no attempt to define that, but there was an attempt to define the other, and you have to be subjective to define the other two, but nobody takes the step to be subjective and try to find out what the meaning of high-end home is. I mean, that just confuses me.
I think the reason why, Mayor Lawrence, is that the actual term livability and character, they're actually terms in the LUDO, and that's why we came up with the recommended use of a dictionary definition, which is what our LUDO says when a term is not defined. That's why we focused on that. The term high-end home doesn't appear in the LUDO, I think, anywhere. It's not a term that we use, so that's why we did.
But my opinion of a high-end home could be totally different from everybody else.
You wouldn't think it would be somewhat related to property value and how much people have to pay for their homes?
Not necessarily.
So you think you could have a high-end home that's cheap?
Well, what's high-end to someone with a $500,000 annual income might be considerably different from a person who has a $150,000 annual income.
But you said you spent a lot of time in that neighborhood. Are you unclear that those are high-end homes? Are you in doubt at all about that?
I think they're real nice homes. I would guess that most of the homes in that neighborhood, when they were constructed, probably cost less than $200,000. I worked on that
Right, but they don't
development
sell
when it
for
was
that
being
now,
built.
and
No.
compared to other neighborhoods in the Dalles, I mean, that would be a comparison, right? Are they better and more expensive, or are they the same, or are they less expensive? Again, lot size compared to other places, we just talked about all the little lots and how they only sell for so much, but there's a whole bunch of them in a row.
Aren't we
But this
getting
area
off
doesn't
track?
have a bunch of little ones. This would be the only one.
Yeah, like I said, if I made my decision based on emotion, I probably wouldn't allow this lot change, but
That's how people buy homes, by emotion.
I don't have, I'm not a planner, and I'm not experienced in this, and all I can do is make a decision based on what was done by the people who are the experts and the assurances of the city attorney that it was done legally. It's not what I would like to see happen, but if the hoops have all been jumped through, I don't know how I can go any other way.
But the hoops haven't all been jumped through because this is the last hoop. Like, we're still part of this. We don't have to do what we're told.
Well, we do according to our own rules. If all of our rules have been met, we don't have a choice.
No,
So what you're
it's not,
saying is, Mr.
it's not a
Mr.
given. It's, if it had been, he could have decided, Mr. Harris, the planning director, but it didn't meet those rules, so it had to go to planning department, and it was subjective. They could say yes or no, and they said yes, and it got appealed, and it came here, and now we can say yes or no.
No, I think, to clarify that, the planning commission wanted this to be done in a certain way, and that was the administrative way, not the ministerial, right? That's what you explained in the beginning. It was ministerial.
That's
you
only
could
about
just
the
have-
building.
Mayor, I think there's two different conversations going on here. What was before the planning commission was the minor partition and the two adjustments. That decision, planning commission approved that, and in the approval of the resolution, they added the condition requiring that the future structures, the future dwellings, would go through an administrative review rather than a ministerial review. An administrative review is an administrative hearing with a hearing officer, which is notice to the surrounding property owners.
And you're saying that the documents where all of this is discussed is not in that process, correct?
That process hasn't occurred yet.
I don't know why there's so much discussion in here of what a house is and whether it's similar to the rest of them.
Because that, in part, was part of the public comments and public testimony during the public hearing, so it was necessary to address those comments in this appeal hearing, whether they're relevant or not to the decision before this body.
What you're saying is they're not relevant to this decision.
They're relevant in so much as they were testimony during the public hearing of the Public Planning Commission. However, the issue, the question before this body is that approval, the minor partition of the lot, and the two quasi-judicial adjustments, which are provided for in our development code.
Okay, just to be clear, when it's sort of reported in here, it doesn't say this is being addressed because it was raised in the hearing. It says additional criteria, and they list the criteria as a structure that conforms to the general character of the neighborhood or zone district. That's a criteria that on page 8 and actually 50 of the whole package is addressed. And so, you know, that's what is confusing. If it would have said, well, we have to address this because it was raised by someone at the hearing, that's fine, but it looks like it's all part of the criteria that in fact was considered.
Well, Mayor, it wasn't meant to be misleading, but it was meant to address the public testimony that occurred at the public hearing.
That's not clear.
And if I may, go on. Also included within the notice of appeal from the appellate, there were certain statements made, again, that were not entirely applicable to that decision, the action, the minor partition. Those are also included in the staff report. you're beginning on page, I guess it's page 7. Speaks about finding 14, there's several bullet points. Again, those were brought out by the appellant, so.
Okay. Any other deliberation?
Well, quick question. Single-family dwelling shall be minimum of 1,250. Where did that come from, and is that true?
Where are you reading that?
That's in the covenant.
It was in the covenant, apparently.
And again, that's not a question or a concern at this time. That's something that's going to come in a later process.
It would have a bearing, though, on the housing that's built. Could a house be built on these partitions that meet this 1,250 square feet?
That's not what we're talking apples and oranges, Tim.
We're talking about dividing the land.
Right,
In my mind, the question at hand is, does this minor partition increase the density in an RL zone? So the argument is taking one lot and creating 2 lot, increasing the density. So one argument would be yes, the other argument would be that the units per acre is not exceeded.
Right.
Correct, and that falls within the ordinance and law.
Correct.
Okay, now.
Thank you for that.
All right. So our decision before us is based solely on partitioning the lot based on the interpretation of law and ordinance and not on the use and occupation of the home nor to preserve the lot size. That's the opposite argument. There's this argument that we fall within what the expectations of the law and the ordinance as written. Now that could be changed in the future, but right now we're working under this law. So, and that's where our decision comes down.
Right.
All right, I understand.
In order for a decision to be reached, there has to be a motion.
I move that we deny this, that we approve the appeal. Where's the, sorry. Where is that? What page is that on?
I think it would be on the last page of the staff report, Counselor Long-Curtis, on...
It's 54.
Thank you.
There's number 3 of the options that were listed for the council.
54? Oh, must not be the packet. Okay, 54.
Yeah, it's actually page 55, I guess, would be in the packet, but it's the
No,
last
it's
page of
way-
the staff report.
I got it on paper, Darcy.
Thank you, that'd be great.
I believe it's this one. You might want to read through it quick.
I move to direct staff to prepare a resolution approving the appeal and affirming and denying the Planning Commission's approval of the minor partition number 349-18, adjustment number 18-036 as set forth in resolution number PC 574-18.
Is there a second?
Does the motion have to include the identifying the criteria, or does that
Well,
come later?
I would, probably that would come later if the motion was actually up for discussion, but it would need at some point to address that issue.
There's no second? Motion fails for lack of second. Is there another motion?
Okay, if the council desires to affirm the planning commission's decision based upon additional findings and conclusions or with different conditions of approval, move to direct staff to prepare a resolution denying the appeal and affirming the planning commission's approval of minor partition number 349-18, adjustment number 18-036 as set forth in resolution number PC 574-18 with modifications to the conditions of approval recommended by the Planning Commission based upon the findings and fact and conclusions of law set forth in the agenda staff report as modified by the council.
What would your modification have been?
the only condition I believe that the applicant asked that be modified was to remove the fifth condition about requiring the administrative approval. That was a condition he asked that be lifted. So that could be a condition you could decide to delete, or you could leave it in. If you want to leave it in, then you would
I
probably
would like
make your
to leave it
first.
in.
Then you would read the staff recommendation
No.
would be your motion. Sorry, if you read all that,
It doesn't apply unless you want to make a modification.
Okay, then I want to make the modification.
No, you don't.
I don't.
All right, so then you read
The step,
number one.
This one
staff
that I read was
recommendation
if you
would
wanted
be the
to
one that
change or
you
add
meant to read, I
conditions of
think.
approval.
Oh,
If you want to
okay.
directly approve what the planning commission did, it would be this language, the italics. I apologize.
Well, I don't know what I'm motioning then.
the first motion would basically approve, it would deny the appeal and approve the planning commission's approval of the partition and the adjustment and include all their conditions, including the one requiring that the plan come back for the administrative review of an actual application of a structure. That would be.
Okay.
That would be the first one. The second would be if you wanted to change any of the planning commission's conditions.
No. So you want me to read this again?
Yeah.
And I'm reading this one.
Number one.
Move to direct staff to prepare a resolution denying the appeal and affirming the planning commission's approval of minor partition number 349-18, adjustment number 18-036 as set forth in resolution number PC 574-18 with the conditions of approval recommended by the planning commission based upon the findings and fact and conclusions of law set forth in the agenda staff report.
Second.
All right, been moved and seconded to adopt the staff recommendation listed under number one as previously stated. Is there any discussion?
Yes. Please do not do this to the homeowners. It doesn't have to be done. You're not forced to do it. Please do not do this to them.
Any other discussion?
Well, I see it as, there's still another step, a conditional step that needs to be met, which addresses the use and occupation of the home and the lot. This partition could fail, or at least in the use that it's going to be proposed.
Exactly.
It could come back to force a single dwelling with another house on the,
I
so.
don't think so. Once a partition's approved, it's approved.
Well, not
It's
if
not
it
gonna
doesn't
force
meet-
a single
not if it
family.
doesn't meet criteria. On the next step, which would be usage and occupancy, and some of those things would be addressed during that time.
But you've already hurt the homeowners at that point.
Not necessarily, we haven't heard in detail, that would be the next step.
I do, because I think it changes the neighborhood by shrinking that lot size. It makes it the only one in the whole subdivision that's different. All the lots were gonna be like that, and their neighborhood was gonna look a certain way. I mean, if I spent all that money, I'm sorry, I live in a less expensive house, but it's a really nice neighborhood, and I would be upset.
Any further discussion? Comments?
Based on the evidence, I don't know if we have, like Russ, I don't know if I have any other choice.
No, it comes to us for a decision because it's less than the automatic what's in the ordinance. So we do have a choice.
All right, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
We have,
one abstention.
Councilman
You voted? Okay, okay.
We voted
voted no.
no.
Okay.
And I voted no.
You voted
Yes.
for?
Yes.
We have three in favor, two against. All right, it passes. All right, next item on the agenda. Agenda now. Next item on the agenda is number 18-021, affirming the planning commission's decision approving adjustment 18-036 18037 of Jonathan Bloom to reduce the minimum lot size for a parcel located at West 13th and Perkins from 9,000 square feet to 7,475 square feet.
Yeah, just going to take a second to catch up here, sorry. To get through this. This is essentially a housekeeping item that following your decision on the land use hearing for the property at 13th and Perkins, the council's vote was to deny the appeal. We've prepared the resolution that sets forth the appropriate findings of fact and conclusions, and we're asking you to adopt the resolution. This would be the actual final decision for that particular hearing.
Need a motion if we're going to approve this?
Move to adopt resolution number 18-021 denying appeal of number 32-18 and affirming the Planning Commission's decision approving adjustment of number 18-037 of Jonathan Bloom to reduce the minimum lot size for a parcel located on West 13th and Perkins Streets from 9,000 square feet to 7,745 square feet.
Boy, I've got a whole different, that's different than what I've got in my packet.
It's
The
the
numbers are,
staff recommendation in this first page of the staff report.
Page 123.
never mind. I'm reading the agenda, never mind.
I'll second that.
All right. Been moved and seconded to do the adoption of resolution number 18-021, denying appeal 32-18, and affirming the Planning Commission decision approving adjustment 18-037 of Jonathan Bloom to reduce the minimum lot size for parcel located at West 13th and Perkins Street from 9,000 square feet to 7,745 square feet. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that's passed. Next item on the agenda is, and I've got to read, adoption of general ordinance number 18-1369, repealing chapter 7.08 sections 7.08.010 to 7.08.090 of the City of the Dalles Municipal Code concerning impoundment of vehicles. At this point, we'll have a presentation by staff.
This is a somewhat of a housekeeping measure. The section that we're talking about of the code cites certain offenses where vehicles can be impounded if drivers are caught for the offenses. There's been recent federal United States Circuit Court of Appeals cases that said that local governments can no longer impound vehicles for these offenses and only can use it in what's called the community caretaking function, which really restricts our ability to impound the cars. The police department has revised their policies to be consistent with the court's opinions, and in talking with Chief Ashmore, we agreed that we should take this language out since we no longer can currently do it under the court opinions, so we're recommending that these sections be repealed so that they would not be on the books.
Any questions?
What brought this up?
Well, this happened some years ago when the cases happened, and this has been the last few years that the police have changed their policy, and unfortunately, I did not catch it when we did our codification. If I had realized we still had that, we probably would have stricken it when we did our codification, but I did not catch it, so it's just now to get us consistent with our policies, so.
What brought the Ninth District
It was
Court?
basically people who had their cars impounded who challenged it and got rulings against several cities, and there's been quite a few cities that have lost those tow cases. They've had to basically pay attorney's fees, pay back costs of towing, and it's been kind of an expensive lesson.
Yeah, we have very little power.
Yeah, it's frustrating because particularly like people that are driving with suspended licenses, that was often an effective tool to stop them. We took the cars, but now we can't do that, so it's, but right now, that's the state of the law, so we have to follow that until it's possibly reversed.
I'll move to adopt general ordinance
Wait a
number.
minute. At this point, I'm going to ask the council if any member desires to have the ordinance read in full.
Absolutely
No.
not.
Okay, so at this point, I'd like to ask the city clerk to read the title of the ordinance.
General ordinance number 18-1369, an ordinance repealing chapter 7.08 of the Dallas Municipal Code concerning the impoundment of vehicles.
So now I'd like a motion to adopt the ordinance by title only.
I'll move to adopt general ordinance number 18-1369, repealing chapter 7.08 of the Dallas Municipal Code concerning impoundment of vehicle by title only.
I'll second.
All right, been moved and seconded to adopt general ordinance number 18-1369, repealing chapter 7.08 sections from 0810 to 0890 of the Dallas Municipal Code concerning impoundment of vehicles. Is there any discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, nothing more for city council tonight. This meeting is adjourned.